Welcome to the Michael Liebowitz Show. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and here today to debate his idea of ethical intuitionism is a philosophy professor of the University of Colorado at Boulder. He's also the author of numerous articles and books, including this one, Ethical Intuitionism. I would recommend reading it if you want to understand his theory. Professor Huemer, welcome back to the show. We're going to do it, each get a 12-minute opening. He'll go first because he's defending ethical intuitionism. Each get 3 5-minute rebuttals, then each get a 7-minute close. If we go over or under, nobody really cares. All right, Professor Huemer, take it away, Mike, and let us know your theory.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm going to talk about ethical intuitionism. So in metaethics, so metaethics is this branch of philosophy that kind of talks about the nature of ethics. It's a little different from ordinary ethics. In ordinary ethics, you just talk about what we should do and what we shouldn't do and what's good and bad. In metaethics, you talk about kind of the nature of these judgments about good and bad, right and wrong. Like, how do we know what's good and bad? And are these reports of objective facts? Okay. And so now, and in this area, traditionally you divide people's views into moral realism and anti-realism, where the moral realists are the people who think that there are objective evaluative facts. So there are objective facts like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Okay. And what it means that that's objective is it's independent of the attitudes of observers towards the thing that you're talking about. Like, the wrongness of torturing babies is independent of how you feel about torturing babies or what you think about it or what you desire. Okay. So, so the realists think that there are objective evaluative facts like that. It's an objective fact that you shouldn't torture babies. And the anti-realists think that there are no such objective facts. Okay. And so ethical intuitionism is a form of moral realism. Traditionally, the anti-realist views divide into three types, I guess, 3 species. There's the subjectivist view, which is that, well, there are moral truths, but they depend on our attitudes. So an example would be the view that the morally wrong thing is just the thing that's disapproved by society, sometimes referred to as cultural relativism. Or another view would be maybe when you say that something is morally wrong, you're just saying that you personally disapprove of it. Okay, and now notice that if that's the case, then there are moral facts, because there is a fact that you disapprove of something. Like there's a fact that you disapprove of killing babies. Okay, and then the second anti-realist view is known as non-cognitivism. And this view holds that moral statements are neither true nor false. The reason that they would be neither true nor false is that they're not really asserting anything. They're not really making a claim about how anything in the world is. And what are they doing instead? Maybe they're just like expressing your feelings, or maybe they're sort of like commands. They're just trying to influence other people's behavior. So on this view, when you say murder is wrong, it's like you're saying, don't murder, right? Or maybe you're saying, murder, boo. Okay. And notice that neither of those utterances would be either true or false, right? Don't murder is neither true nor false because it's not a statement, it's a command. Now, the sentence murder is wrong grammatically looks like it's an assertion, but these people say, even though it looks like an assertion, it's not really. Okay. And so then that's why it would be neither true nor false. And so then there wouldn't be any evaluative facts. Okay. And then the third anti-realist view is nihilism or error theory, which says, well, these evaluative statements are just always false. So they are making a claim, and they're making a claim about mind-independent reality, but that claim is always false because there just aren't any values in the mind-independent world. Okay, so the nihilists agree with the realists about what it means when you say that something is wrong. They agree that you're attributing an objective property to the thing, and they just think there aren't any of those properties. So what you're saying is always false. Okay. So, and so now why I'm a moral realist is basically that I think all three of those views are bad, right? So just like very briefly, why you shouldn't hold the subjectivist view? Well, basically implies that if we all approve of torturing babies, then we should torture babies. right? Just take any horrible thing, and then the view implies that if we approve of that thing, then we ought to do that thing, right? Or it's morally right to do that thing. And that just seems obviously false. If you lived in Nazi Germany, you should not have participated in persecuting the Jews and sending them to concentration camps, even though that's what society approved of. Even if you approved of it, you should not have done that. Okay. And then the reason why I disagree with the non-cognitivist view is, well, basically moral statements just act like assertions of fact in every respect that you can come up with. All right. So like you can say, if abortion is wrong, then God is probably angry about it. Okay. And then so that doesn't make sense if the phrase abortion is wrong doesn't express a proposition. Like if A isn't a proposition, then if A, then B doesn't make sense. Okay. Why I disagree with nihilism is basically it's just absurd. It's just like, they're just examples of evaluative statements that are a lot more obvious than any of the premises that the nihilists are starting from, right? So like to convince me that, it's an implication of nihilism that Hitler did nothing wrong, right? Because on their view, nothing is wrong. Okay, so Hitler did nothing wrong. Okay, well, it's, in order to convince you of that, they would have to have some argument with premises that are more obvious than the fact that Hitler did something wrong. So I don't think they're going to come up with it. Okay, good. All right, so now we're in the territory of moral realism. Traditionally, there are two moral realist views. There's a reductionist naturalist view, and there's a non-naturalist intuitionist view. Okay, so the reductionists think that moral facts can be reduced to descriptive facts. This means roughly you can explain what goodness is without using evaluative terms. Okay, so like an example would be for a thing to be good is for it to promote pleasure. Like maybe utilitarians would say that. Okay, so then and the word pleasure is not an evaluative term, it's a descriptive term. So then I just explain goodness in descriptive terms. Okay, now that's not what most naturalists think, I don't think. But, like another example would be, maybe this would be the Ayn Rand view, right? That for a thing to be good is for it to promote life. Okay, and, promote life, like those are descriptive terms. So you just explain value in descriptive terms. Okay. And then the ethical naturalists, reductionists or naturalists, the ethical naturalists usually say that evaluative facts empirically. There's some kind of empirical evidence, basically evidence that's based on observation. Okay, and then the other realist view is intuitionism, where the intuitionists think that moral truths a priori. So them in some kind of way that doesn't depend upon observation. And the name intuitionism comes from the idea that we have an experience called an ethical intuition, which is how the basic moral truths. It's not how all of the moral truths, but it's how the basic ones that are non-inferential, right? Okay, what's an ethical intuition? Roughly, it's an experience in which something seems to you good or bad or right or wrong, not as a result of an argument, but just by thinking about the proposition. Like you think about somebody torturing babies, and it just seems wrong to you. You don't need to go through an argument, it just seems wrong. Okay, so that experience of it seeming wrong, that's an ethical intuition. Okay. Intuitions generally are cases where when you think about something just on its own, you just sort of reflect intellectually, something seems to you to be the case. Okay. Also the intuitionists think that moral facts are not reducible. So you can't explain what goodness is without using evaluative terms. And roughly like the most popular argument for this is sometimes referred to as the open question argument. But basically it's you take some evaluative statement and then you try substituting the thing that's supposed to be the definition of the value term. And then you just notice that the sentence doesn't mean the same thing. Okay, so suppose somebody says that goodness is just promoting pleasure. And then you can give this argument. Well, suppose somebody asks, is it good to promote pleasure? And obviously that does not mean, does promoting pleasure promote pleasure? Those are not the same question. So that means that being good is not the same as promoting pleasure. Okay. And then, and then the other thing about, okay, so that's sort of like that's a short version. There's a lot more to say, but that's the short version of like the initial reason why we don't think that value facts are reducible. About the epistemological thing, which I think, may be what Michael and I have most argument about. Yeah, how do we know a value of truths? And basically, I think that the naturalists have no good account of this. So sometimes they give analogies to scientific reasoning, but basically, in modern science, there are a number of examples where we discovered that there's something that we had a sort of ordinary concept of, and then we developed some scientific theory about what the thing really is. Like, for example, we discovered that water is really a compound of hydrogen and oxygen. Like there are all of these little water particles, and each one is composed of an oxygen atom and 2 hydrogen atoms. Okay, but the thing is, the way that we discovered that is that there are specific observational predictions of that theory. There are things that happen that you can explain by saying that water is H2O that you cannot explain if you have other theories. So, like, for example, electrolysis on a sample of water decomposes it. Like, you can apply an electric potential difference to a sample of water, and then you get bubbles of hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, right, at the positive and negative terminals. That's explained by the H2O theory. It's not explained by other theories. If you think water is NaCl, it doesn't explain why you can decompose it into hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, there is nothing like that with morality. Like, if you give a moral theory, there is no experiment that you can do that your theory about the nature of goodness explains the outcome of that couldn't be explained if you had a different moral theory. So there's somebody who says, let's say somebody says, well, goodness is promoting life. And then there's somebody else who says, no, I think goodness is, promoting pleasure. These two people, there are no experiments that one of them can explain that the other one doesn't, right? Which means there is no empirical evidence, right, relative to the naturalistic theory. Okay, what's wrong with intuition? And what is this intuition thing? Okay, and basically, why do I believe that intuition is a source of knowledge or justified belief? Basically, I think that all justified beliefs, and really all beliefs that you form anytime that you're seeking the truth, are based upon the way things seem to you. If you're in a truth-seeking activity and you're forming beliefs, you're believing the thing that seems correct to you. And I think if you reflect on it, you're going to realize that that's true. And then when you realize that that's true, then you realize that you have to accept that it's rational to believe that things are the way they seem, at least unless and until you have a reason to think otherwise. I'm not saying that the appearances are always correct or always have to be believed, but I'm saying that the appearances are the starting point. If you don't have that starting point, then you never get anywhere. Okay, now if you accept that in general, and so sensory appearances are an example of this. So when you observe something visually or auditorially or whatever, you assume that it is the way that it appears. You assume the things that you see are the way they look, unless and until you have reason to think otherwise, right? Unless you have specific grounds for doubt. Okay. And then, when you seem to remember things, you assume that the things happened roughly as you remember them, unless you have specific reason to doubt that. Okay. And then I claim that just applies across the board. And if you don't do that, then you can never form any beliefs. And then if you accept that, then, well, there's no reason why we wouldn't also accept that when it comes to thinking about morality. So you think about a moral proposition, it just seems right to you. Like you think about, is it okay to kill people for fun? It just seems like it's wrong. So why wouldn't we accept that unless and until we have specific grounds for doubting it, just like we accept all other appearances until we have grounds for doubting them. All right, okay. And then let's see, it looks like maybe I have a little time left. So I'll just say a couple of things like, what are the most popular objections to intuitionism? Okay, one of the most popular types of objections is somebody just lists a time when something seemed right to them and they were wrong. Okay, human beings are fallible, and it's like it can't be a requirement for a legitimate way of forming beliefs that it be infallible and that there be no examples of where you go wrong. It's not the job of an epistemologist to tell you how to form beliefs so that there's no risk of ever going wrong. Okay. Now, it would be a problem if you could show that the majority of intuitions are false. okay, then maybe that would be a reason for not believing them. But of course, you can't show that. Okay, another thing people say is, well, there's a lot of disagreement. So sometimes people have conflicting ethical intuitions. And then I think, yeah, there's a lot of disagreement about a lot of things. Like if you do philosophy at all, there's a lot of disagreement about philosophy. Actually, there's a lot of disagreement about the argument from disagreement itself. Like people disagree about what disagreement shows, right? And so like if you think that the existence of disagreement means that you can't form a belief about something, then you can't form a belief about the argument that you just gave, right? About why you shouldn't form beliefs about morality. Okay, and okay, well, why is this wrong anyway? Well, the existence of disagreement does give you reason for lowering your confidence in the thing that people are disagreeing about. So if something seems correct to you and then it seems wrong to other people, that is a reason for lowering your confidence. That's correct. But that doesn't mean that you have to lower your confidence in all of your judgments or all the judgments in the entire subject matter. You should still have high confidence in the judgments that are generally agreed upon. So there's some moral issues that people widely disagree about, but there are others that people widely agree about. And so, right. And so by the same reasoning, you should increase your confidence when you find that people agree with you. Like, for example, they agree that you shouldn't torture babies for fun. Like that's pretty much universal. So you should increase your confidence once you realize that other people agree with it. Okay. So I think that's enough. And then I'll just, invite your comments.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. All right. So, to begin with, Mike didn't define essential terms: morality, value. Now, Mike will likely argue, because he's argued in the past, that definitions are not necessary. But definitions are what distinguish one concept from other concepts. They tell us essentially what it is that we're talking about. So, without one, I don't see how we can actually know what Mike even means when he uses terms like morality or value. What exactly are the moral properties, imperceptible as they are? It's true that not every concept requires a definition. Axiomatic concepts, these are the fundamental facts of reality, the base of knowledge. They don't require definitions. Some things are defined extensively. We just point at them. What are they? Personal pronouns. They don't need, or proper nouns rather, I'm sorry. Proper nouns don't need to be defined. But moral properties are not directly perceptible or grounded in observation. Mike himself says they aren't accessible to the senses. And if they're also non relational, there's nothing to point to and nothing to observe. So the question stands, how do we know what he's referring to at all? Mike also offers no standard of value, nothing against which moral claims can be assessed. Now, Mike has argued in the past that moral standards aren't necessary and that most moral philosophers don't rely on them. But Aristotle, the Stoics, Epicureans, Kant, the utilitarians, the pragmatists, all worked from an identifiable standard. Mike himself has said, and I'll quote, "If the reason we must obey God turns on God's goodness, then some moral facts must exist prior to God's commands. God must already be good, so there must already be a standard of value in place," unquote. Granted, when Mike references a standard, he may mean something different than the ordinary philosophical meaning, but if so, then he can say so. Also, if he does mean something different, this demonstrates the importance of defining your terms. Now, Mike says we know moral truths by intuition, and he says some are self evident. I don't think we have any reason to trust these intuitions. Now, Mike responds that the same objections apply to reason, to sense perception, and memory. I think he's wrong. Reason, sense, evidence, and memory are not things we conclude we ought to trust. They're things we're already relying on the moment we try to argue about anything at all, including whether to trust them. Denying them is not coherent because the act of denial already assumes or presupposes them. You cannot form a sentence. You cannot use a concept. You cannot hold the premises of an argument in mind without exercising reason, without concepts drawn from sense experience, and without memory to carry the argument forward. Acceptance of these is not a judgment we make, it's a condition of making any judgment at all. Moral intuitions have no such status. Moral beliefs are not a precondition of the affirming or denying. One can reason, argue, deny, and conclude all day without ever relying on a moral intuition to do so. So, doubting moral intuitions produces no comparable incoherence. There's simply no stopping point here, the way there is with reason, sense, and memory. The question remains, what corrects a moral intuition when it's wrong? Mike says we can reference better or stronger intuitions, but then it's seemings all the way down with no way, even in principle, to sort a true one from a false one. If some moral truths are really self-evident, then we would not expect to see such widespread and persistent disagreement over them, particularly at the foundational level. Throughout history, people have disagreed about the nature of morality, whether it's deontological, teleological, whether God is necessary, whether there's morality at all. They've disagreed whether some instances of rape, killing, sacrificing children, or slavery are morally acceptable. Now, of course, disagreement itself doesn't disprove self-evidence, but here it's especially significant because, as I've said in Mike's theory, there's no independent corrective mechanism for distinguishing a genuine moral intuition from a mistaken one. When intuitions conflict, again, the only apparent court of appeal is further intuition. Mike will likely note that disagreement exists in other fields too, but in those fields there's a method for narrowing it, a check external to the disputant's impressions. And self-evident truths are supposed to be graspable directly and reliably by rational agents. One would expect that to produce some general agreement at the foundations at minimum. Instead, we get the opposite and no mechanism on his view for resolving it. To sum that up, we have undefined moral properties, no standard by which to judge moral values, lots of disagreements regarding even fundamentals, and no objective method for resolving disagreements. Now, Mike pointed out that it would seem to most normal people that killing babies is wrong, torturing babies is wrong, killing people is wrong. I don't disagree. The problem is that it seems that way could just be the result of what we're taught. A seeming is basically a feeling. It's a sense that something is true or false. But our feelings stem from the beliefs that we have. We're told since we're little that certain things are wrong, and that's largely because of the culture that we're in. An example I'll give is I once was going to convert to Judaism, so I started practicing kashrut. As a result, when I ate pork, I felt guilty. It seemed wrong to me because I already came to believe it was wrong. Now, if I grow up in a culture that says sacrificing babies is okay, sacrificing humans is okay, killing your enemy indiscriminately or raping their women is okay, then that would likely seem okay to me, but that proves nothing. So that is my opening. I don't need the full 12 minutes, Mike, but now you have 5 and we each get 3 of these 5-minute rebuttals. Okay, something went wrong, Mike. Your microphone. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay.
Now I hear you. Now I hear you.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm going to try to get through these things, but I may not be able to. What do moral terms mean? So I'm not going to define them. In my view, basically no philosopher has ever successfully defined anything. Now, that might be a controversial statement, but the following is not controversial. A philosopher has never given a definition that was generally accepted by philosophers to be correct. And as far as I know, every definition that any philosopher ever gave in the history of the subject was subjected to what other philosophers regarded as clear counterexamples. Okay, I have a paper about this. I cannot go into this in detail, but anyway, how do you come to understand something if you don't get a definition? Okay, like the idea that you understand terms by hearing their definitions is just completely wrong. How do you come to understand things? Well, basically by being given examples. So what happens is people will give you examples of things that are right behavior and wrongful behavior. And when you think about those behaviors, you will have an intuitive reaction. And because you're having the same intuition that the speaker had, you figure out what they're talking about. Like you see certain actions happen, and then you have a reaction to them. And then you hear other people say that was wrong. And then you figure out that by wrong, they mean that thing that you were intuiting. Okay, because there's enough of a pattern. Okay. Do we need a standard of value? I'm not totally sure what Michael meant by standard of value. So let me say what I meant, right? Like, I think there are objective facts about what is right and wrong. And there are features of an action that make it right or make it wrong. However, I don't think that there is a single feature that makes all right actions right. There are multiple different features. Okay, so whether that counts as there being a standard of value, I don't know. Okay, and I don't want to just, I don't want to list all of the things that are right making or wrong making, but you get the idea. Like causing harm to people is a wrong making feature. Whatever, deception is a wrong making feature in action, and there's just multiple different ones. Okay. Yeah, Michael said that you don't have to presuppose the reliability of ethical intuition, but allegedly you have to presuppose the reliability of reason, observation, and memory when you do any cognition. Now, the thing is, ethical intuition just means intuitions about a specific subject matter. You have to presuppose the reliability of intuition anytime you do any cognition. So if you're going to use reason is founded on intuition. That is, you can't make any arguments unless you can have starting points. And you also can't make any arguments unless you can tell what logical relations propositions have to each other. Unless you can tell when one proposition supports another. And the way that you know that one proposition supports another is that it just seems that way when you think about it. Okay, now if you restrict your consideration to a particular subject matter, then it's true that you can avoid relying on cognitions about that subject matter. So you don't have to rely on intuition specifically about morality in order to do any reasoning. Okay, but that's also true about all of our methods of cognition. So suppose somebody wants to say, we can't know anything about cats. Cats are unknowable. And then you say, well, but we can observe them. And then I could say, well, you don't have to presuppose the reliability of cat observations in order to do anything else. So we don't have to accept that cat observations are reliable. Okay, like we can perfectly well reason without them. Okay, so that's true, but there's no reason why you would trust other observations but not cat observations. Okay, similarly, it's true that you could get by without using ethical intuitions, but there's no reason why you would trust other intuitions but not ethical intuitions, or at least I haven't seen a reason, right? Okay, well, what could be the reasons? Oh, actually, maybe the reason that there's a lot of disagreement in ethics. I think that Michael was thinking that, there's a lot of disagreement about the foundational propositions in ethics, and that's a problem, and that's not true about other areas. But I think that's not true. I think the foundational propositions in ethics are things like, particular kinds of actions being wrong, like it's wrong to torture babies. And I think that there's very widespread agreement about that. Okay, then philosophers have explanations of why these things are wrong, like, oh, it violates the categorical imperative. You can't universalize the maxim or something like that. Okay, that's a theory that's supposed to explain our judgments about what's wrong. That's supposed to explain our intuitions about more specific things that are wrong. Okay, but that's analogous to, thinking that atomic theory is foundational, right? Like, if Kant's theory is true, it's not foundational. It would be justified, if at all, by its explaining our ethical intuitions about other things. Similarly to how atomic theory is not foundational. So it's metaphysically more fundamental, but it's not epistemologically fundamental. Atomic theory has to be justified by its being able to explain our observations, just as ethical theories have to be justified by explaining these particular ethical intuitions. Okay, and there's not a lot of disagreement about the ethical intuitions. There is some disagreement because people can be biased because of their particular culture, but there are also times when you're not biased because of your particular culture. There are times when your emotions influence your ethical judgments or your ethical intuitions, but there are also times when they don't. Okay, so like I think that if A is better than B and B is better than C, then A must be better than C. And that's not influenced by any particular emotions. Okay, now I was going to try to give, examples of intuitions where, um, well, let's just assume that you know what these are. Okay, so you give the example of the trolley problem to people, and they think that it is right to turn the trolley, and then you give the example of the organ harvesting doctor, and they think that it's wrong. Okay, and that particular pattern of judgments is reliable. Like you do this to any audience, and they'll give the correct results. It's wrong to sacrifice one to save five in the one case, but it's right in the other case. And the reason that's interesting is nobody taught them that. And in fact, they can't come up, like it's very hard to come up with the explanation of those judgments, right? So it's clear that people are making intuitive judgments that were not taught to them. And also, like, they don't have a personal stake in it. So, like, there's no particular reason why their emotions would bias them. Okay, so that's all. Oh, I think you're muted. It looks like you're still. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When you did it, I was going to say I do that all the time. And now you've seen I do it all the time. I forget to unmute myself. Thanks, Mike. So, in regard to definitions, Mike says, well, no philosophers come up with a generally accepted definition of anything. But that's just referring to the same argument from Disagreement that Mike rejects. Because no philosopher has come up with a definition doesn't mean there isn't one. But in fact, most philosophers, if you can go to a dictionary, for instance, and you look up the definition of value, and dictionary across dictionary, generally value means any object of relative quality or worth, or it means any object desirable as a means or end in itself, something along those lines. So the word value is defined. Morality is basically, you look it up, it's a system defining right and wrong behavior. They're very similar in scope. So they are actually defined. And the fact that philosophers disagree over them really doesn't matter, because a definition is supposed to identify the fundamental characteristic of of a concept that differentiates it from everything else. So people can be wrong about what differentiates it, or they can be, their context doesn't allow them to know the most clear case of what differentiates it, but it doesn't mean there isn't something that differentiates it. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be defined. So, and also, Mike talked about the observations. And it's true, you're talking about observations of cats, you're talking about observations of cups, observations of lighting, and you wouldn't say, well, the observations aren't reliable here. The problem is with the ethical intuitions is they're not based on observation of anything. They're solely based, in Mike's view, on what it seems to you to be the case. Now, Mike brought up the trolley problem and the organ harvesting problem. And he says, well, people agree on these intuitions and they actually come up with the correct answer. But the correct answer, what is the correct answer? That assumes the very thing in question. That assumes the very thing that we are debating. And, the idea that most people agree that killing babies is wrong, I mean, there have been many cultures out there that thought that sacrificing children was wrong. That was correct. There's been cultures that thought that pedophilia was just fine, and that was the moral thing to do. The fact that we've changed and people now broadly agree to different things doesn't mean that the intuitions are correct. Now, again, the disagreement on its own doesn't mean that people are doesn't mean that it's mistaken or the theory's bad. I agree with Mike. We can't be expected to be, omniscient or infallible. But when you're saying things are self-evident, I wouldn't expect, and I don't think most people would expect there to be such disagreement. Also, there's no mechanism other than other seemings to tell us which intuitions are wrong. You have to rely on other seemings. And what are those seemings justified by or corrected by? Other seemings. Again, it's seemings all the way down. In our observations, there's means to correct. In math, there's means to correct. Doesn't mean that everybody's all of a sudden going to agree, but there's things external to the system that allow you for correction. There's nothing within this theory to do that. Okay, Mike, go ahead. That's each. That's one each so far.
Okay, good. Thank you. Um, let's see. Well, yeah, just to take up the last thing that you were saying, you said that it was seemings all the way down, and I agree with that, except that I agree with that in a very broad way. That is, the nature of knowledge is seemings all the way down. There's no way of correcting any mistake about anything other than seemings. Okay, so let's say you look at the Mueller-Lyer illusion, which is this illusion which you have two lines that are the same length, but there's like arrows pointing in on one line, and there's arrows pointing outward on the other line, and then it makes one of them look like it's longer than the other one when they're really the same length. Okay, so you have an appearance that one line is longer, but that is mistaken. And how do you correct it? You correct it by other appearances. You never do anything else. Like, I have no idea what the people making this argument are thinking. I just have no idea how they think that you correct mistakes. The way that you correct that one about the Mueller-Lyer illusion is, let's say maybe you take a ruler, and then when you compare the ruler, it looks like this one is 4 inches long, and then it looks like the other one is also 4 inches long. Those are appearances, right? Like, it's not, the line isn't in your head, right? You're having a visual experience of it. Okay, and so you correct sensory appearances by appealing to other sensory appearances. You correct memories by appealing to other memories and maybe other sensory appearances. Okay, like you remember something, but then you go and check. Like, you remember something being at some location, you go to that location to see whether it's there. And then maybe you conclude that you were mistaken, like you had an incorrect memory. Well, that's just comparing the memory appearance to the visual appearance. That's the only thing that you ever do, right? You correct things by other appearances. Okay, so if you don't assume that appearances are innocent until proven guilty, basically, then you never get anywhere. You can't do anything. Okay. About the argument from disagreement. Now, I'm not completely rejecting the relevance of disagreement. So if other people disagree with a particular cognition that you have, that is reason for doubting it. That you should lower your confidence in that. Okay, but I am saying also that by the same token, if you think that, you should also accept that if other people agree with your cognition, that should increase your confidence. It's the same thing, right? Okay, and so there are cases where like we should not be confident. Like, if you have judgments about, particularly judgments about sexual morality differ a lot between cultures. So you should really be suspicious about your judgments about that. But then there are other things that don't differ a lot, where there's a lot of convergence. Okay, now in particular, and Michael had mentioned that, well, a lot of cultures have had like crazy ideas, like you should sacrifice people. But by the way, the cultures that did human sacrifice, they had totally wrong factual beliefs. Like, the Aztecs literally thought that the sun would stop shining if you didn't sacrifice innocent people. Okay, which is not true, and which is important. Okay, but anyway, this is the important thing, though. Like, well, people in primitive societies have been wrong about virtually everything. Like, virtually every theoretical claim that they made about, almost every subject is like totally wrong. However, over time, you see different societies in the world starting to converge. So in various different areas. So in science, in various areas of science, we just get better and better theories over time. And then if you go to different societies around the world, the scientists in the different societies will tend to converge. They will tend to share the same theories. The same is true about morality. So the people in earlier times in our society and also in primitive cultures today will have different values, but over time, they're moving in a particular direction, which is broadly speaking, more liberal values. Okay, so like the fact that we're moving in this direction and the fact that there's convergence among different societies is evidence that the way that they are moving is towards the correct values.
Okay, so Mike says there's no way of correcting anything except for based on other seemings. But then he immediately jumps to sense impressions. to sense perceptions. In the case of the illusions he's talking about, it's in any introductory to psychology book. They show the arrows bent one way and then the arrows facing the other way, but you can take a ruler and you can ultimately measure the two lines so that you can come to the correct view. But as I said earlier, sense perceptions are axiomatic. You cannot deny them without using them. If a seeming is the equivalence of a sense impression, of a sense perception, then the seeming is out the door, because when it comes to ethical intuitions, they're not based on sense perceptions, right? They're a seeming divorced from reality, divorced from your observations. Your senses give you direct contact with reality. It's how we come to know reality. It's undeniable without using it. The same is not true for these moral seemings or moral intuitions, right? Now we get to, he says, well, these other cultures are factually mistaken. Okay, if their moral views are based on mistaken facts, it seems to me that in some way, then their moral views are based on, again, observations, because their beliefs have to be in some way derived from observation. Even their belief that the sun's going to go out. Okay, how do they know there's a sun? How do we know that they were wrong about the sun? We know all of this because we have observations, we have corrective mechanisms, right? Now, I'm very confident that culturally we are wrong about a lot of facts right now, right? There's things that we think that aren't true, just like every other society going back to the beginning of time. You have mistaken beliefs, you have bad factual beliefs. But again, when it comes to those facts, we have correction mechanisms. We have observations, we have scientific method, we have the ruler that we can measure the error. There's things that we can do in relation to the seemings. We simply don't have the corrective mechanism. We just don't have it. So if we're factually wrong and it's leading to bad seemings, if indeed the seemings are based on the facts, but if the seemings are based on the facts, then they're in some way connected to reality, but we can still correct the facts. I don't know that the seemings necessarily follow. Mike seems to think that they do. But plenty of people right now don't think that there's any such thing as morality at all. How do you prove to those people, or how do you demonstrate that there's such a thing based as morality, based on moral facts, because people happen to feel that way? I don't know the answer. And further reference to seemings just doesn't make sense. Okay, Mike, go ahead. This is the last 5 minutes that we have now.
Okay, good. Thanks. I mean, there's a question there about how you prove that morality is real to a skeptic. Like maybe you run into a nihilist, and you may be unable to prove it to them, which is, exactly the same as the way you maybe, if you run into a just a epistemological skeptic, you may be unable to prove anything to them. So if you run into Peter Unger, who's like a radical skeptic who thinks that we have no knowledge of anything, you are also not going to be able to convince him that we know anything. Or if there's somebody who just doesn't believe that you should trust the senses, you're not going to be able to convince him that he should trust the senses. Okay, but so what? Well, you have to start by assuming that things are the way they appear unless you have reason to think otherwise. If you don't start from that position, then you can't get anywhere. If you do start from that position, then the skeptic doesn't have a good argument to get you out of it. Right? So that's basically my view on epistemology. That's my view about morality. That's my view about our knowledge of the external world. Okay, what is the difference? Like, I don't know what the difference is supposed to be between intuition and sense perception. So there's a point that, well, you can't correct intuitions except by using other intuitions. It's also true that you can't correct sense perceptions except by using other sensory perceptions. Then Michael says, oh yeah, but sensory perceptions are axiomatic. Well, why aren't intuitions axiomatic? And like the only reason that was given for why intuitions are different from sense perceptions is, intuitions can't be checked, but they can be checked in the same sense that sensory perceptions can be checked. So, and it's like, these are both cases where something seems correct to you. Like you have a sensory observation, you assume that things are the way they appear unless you have reason to think otherwise. And then you have an intuition, which is also a case of something seeming a certain way to you, and you assume that that appearance is also correct unless you have reason to think otherwise. I don't know what the difference is. So Michael said, well, sense perception gives you direct contact with reality. Why don't you think that intuition gives you direct contact with moral reality? It's like, And just sort of seemed like it was begging the question. Okay, about these other cultures. Okay, so you have people like the Aztecs or the Mayans who think that human sacrifice is justified, and that's partly because of their factual beliefs and also because of their moral beliefs. But what I meant to suggest is that the main disagreement that we have with them is over the factual beliefs, not their moral values. So like we don't disagree with the Aztecs that it would be bad if the sun stopped shining. And the reasons why that would be bad, like, well, then we would all die. And we don't disagree with them that death is bad. We just disagree with them that the sun is going to stop shining if you don't kill people. So like, okay. And so a certain amount of the moral disagreement is really factual disagreement. And we're really agreeing on the value statements. I'm not saying that's all of it, though. I'm just saying that reduces the amount of disagreement. Okay. There is still some disagreement, but the reaction to that should just be, oh, well, we should lower our confidence in the specific things that we're disagreeing about, but we should raise our confidence in the things that we're agreeing about. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, I felt like there's sort of like a circularity in Michael's argument where it's sort of like you're assuming that intuition isn't a legitimate method of knowing things. And then because of that, because it's not a legitimate method of knowing things, it's also not a legitimate method of correcting if an intuition is mistaken. But if you start by assuming that it is a legitimate method and that we are in contact with moral reality, which is the intuitionist view, right, then I don't see that there's a relevant difference from sensory perception. Okay, I guess that's enough.
Okay, so Peter Unger. Yeah. I come across Peter Unger and he tells me there's no such thing as knowledge, right? Immediately, Peter Unger is contradicting himself because he's claiming to have knowledge. He's assuming that I'm real, that I exist, that he has knowledge that I exist, right? So it's the same thing with sense perceptions. If I say sense perceptions are totally, you cannot depend upon them, but I'm relying on the other person's hearing as I'm talking, as I'm communicating things that I have derived from my sense experiences. So you say, why aren't intuitions axiomatic? Well, because intuitions can be denied without using them. Senses cannot. You cannot deny senses without using them. It's simply not possible. But if you want to deny intuitions, if I say, well, that moral intuition, you have no moral intuition. I'm not using a moral intuition to make that statement. There's no contradiction. There's no reason why it's axiomatic. Ultimately, every conversation, everything that we say, everything we do is rooted in the idea that the senses are generally reliable. Doesn't mean they're infallible, but it does mean that we can rely on sense perceptions. The same thing is not true for intuitions. That's the difference, and it's a huge difference. Unless you're going to say that intuitions or seemings are equivalent with sensations. But if they are equivalent with sensations, then how do they know moral properties when moral properties are not discoverable by sensations? You're claiming an extra means of knowledge to know a realm that you're not defining, you're not telling us what it is. There's no way to know it except for intuitions. That's fundamentally different from what we talk about when we're referring to things that we learn from the senses. All right, that's 3 and 3, I believe. So we go now to the 7-minute closings. Can I just say something quickly? I always think that these 5 minutes is not going to be enough, and then we end up getting what we want out before the 5 minutes comes up. I don't know.
Yeah. Because we're talking fast.
We're fast talkers.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I just want to respond to that. So I don't know that this is, a normal closing as opposed to just a response. But yeah, you meet Peter Unger and he says, oh, we don't know anything. And then you say, oh, he's assuming that he knows things. No, he's not. Or at least he wouldn't say that, right? If you tell him, oh, you're assuming that you know that I exist, you would say, no, I'm not. I don't know that you exist. And you go, oh, well, then why are you saying this? Well, you might exist. Yeah, I don't know. But maybe you exist, maybe you don't. I don't have any reason to think that I shouldn't say these things to you. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that, right? Maybe he would say something like that. And then, you're like, oh, you're assuming that you know the meanings of the words that you're using in order to use them. And he'd be like, no, I'm not assuming that. Just like maybe they mean what I think they mean, maybe they don't. I'm just I'm uncertain about everything. Just okay. This is what the skeptics would say. They always say this. Okay, but also, and if you might think, well, okay, but he's saying that, but in reality, he is using his knowledge. Okay, but there's a pretty parallel argument that you're also using your knowledge of values every time you do anything. So like you're engaging in a debate with me, and like you're assuming that truth is a value, because otherwise, why should we be doing this debate, and why should we be trying to figure out what the truth is about value, right? And just sort of like, oh, maybe in all of your behavior, you're assuming some values, right? Because why are you doing the things that you're doing if there's not some values, that are supported by your actions? So, okay, but anyway, this is the thing. Like the reason why you're justified in believing something cannot be merely like, even if this was true, that you have to assume that in order to do the thing that you're doing. Like that can't confer justification. That cannot be why you're justified, right? Because well, that would just show that either you're justified or you're not justified in doing the thing that you're doing. But okay, but it just like the fact that you might be hypocritical if you say that you're not justified in doing something doesn't explain why the thing is justified. So what could be the explanation? Okay, what could be the explanation for why we're justified in believing in the external world without first proving that the senses are reliable? And I think the explanation would have to be, well, it's rational to assume that things are the way they appear unless you have reason to doubt it. Okay. And by the way, it's not just sensory appearances, it's also intellectual things. So, as a matter of fact, Descartes thought, you could doubt the senses and you couldn't doubt reason and intuition and intellectual intuitions, right? Because, you could be a brain in a vat, or he didn't have the brain in a vat scenario, but there could be a deceiving God, you could be dreaming and stuff like that. So you could think of how your senses could be deceiving you in ways that would not lead to you being deceived about sort of abstract, purely intellectual matters. So like there's a case to be made that there's more coherence in doubting the senses in this radical way, like thinking that you might be a brain in a vat, than doubting your intellectual judgments. Okay, and by the way, not by the way, but as one of the central points, intellectual activity is not separable from what I'm calling intuition. Like many of the people who don't like intuition really just don't like the word. They don't like the word, but they don't know what it means, when it's used in academic epistemology, right? Like it's not the ordinary English use of the word intuition, right? Okay, and when you think about the use of this word in academic epistemology, and then you reflect on it, you're going to realize that no, this thing is not separable from what I'm doing constantly every time that I'm doing philosophy, but really like any kind of reasoning or thinking. I'm having things seem to me a certain way, not just like look to me a certain way with the eyes, but I'm thinking and things are seeming a certain way as I'm thinking. And that's going on all the time when you're thinking. And if you're saying that you can't trust the way things seem to you intellectually, then you can't be doing any thinking, right? Then there's not a sharp distinction between the kind of appearance that goes on when you make an inference and the kind that goes on when you have what we call an intuition, right? Like there's not a sharp distinction between, for example, the intuition that proposition A supports proposition B and the ability to infer B from A. Like if you're going through some argument and you have premise A and premise B, and then you get conclusion C, and you infer C from A and B, like your ability to make that inference is not sharply distinguishable from your ability to have the intuition that the conjunction of A and B logically supports C, right? And like that is an abstract relationship between these propositions, between the first pair of propositions and the third proposition. Okay, so like if you're saying, oh well, we can't trust intuitions, then you can't trust judgments about logic, and then you can't trust reasoning, and you can't trust any kind of intellectual activity, and so then you just can't do anything. Now, if you then if you then just want to say, oh well, but I only want to doubt intuitions about value. Well, why would that be? Why would we get to trust our intellectual judgments about descriptive matters, but not about value matters? Like that just seems arbitrary. Okay.
All right. First of all, Professor Huemer, Mike, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, to debate with me. Always respectful, always great. So my point with Unger isn't to demonstrate that he's a hypocrite or that he has to be convinced. It's to demonstrate the difference between a moral seeming and sense impressions, that he is in blatant contradiction when he's using words, when he's talking to me, when he's making claims, if he then says there's no knowledge, which is to demonstrate that the senses are ultimately axiomatic. Now, you said we would have to prove that the senses are valid, but the senses are the precondition. They're the very basis of proof. Proof is reducing propositions, reducing conclusions, reducing arguments back to the data of the senses. You can't step outside the senses to prove that the senses are correct or to prove that they're accurate. They're axiomatically correct in the very fact that you cannot deny them without using them. Now, you said that there's a sense in which by acting we're assuming values. No, we're not assuming there's objective values. I am demonstrating by having this debate, I'm demonstrating that I value debate, I value discussion. But that's not proving or demonstrating there's an objective value. All that's demonstrating is what I happen to like and what I prefer and what I value. That's, to me, is not debatable. Human beings have preferences, they have values, they have things that they like, have things that they dislike, but that doesn't demonstrate in any way, shape, or form that there's such thing as an objective value. Now, you referenced Descartes. And Descartes famously said, "I can doubt everything except for the fact that I doubt, and so I have to exist in order to doubt." But in that way, Descartes puts consciousness before reality. But to know that you're conscious, you have to know that you're conscious of something. As far as things like brain in the vat go, well, I could be a brain in a vat. I could be under a secret demon. This could be a dream. All the various ways in which people construct hypotheticals that would demonstrate that I'm not actually gaining knowledge of reality. There's no evidence for any of these things. I could just as easily say to you, well, how do you know that a little green man isn't coming to me at night and giving me all my arguments? You can't prove it. The onus then would be on me to present evidence for that. And it's similar with these brain in the vat arguments. They ultimately are empty. They don't contain any evidence for them. They're just things that people dream up. Finally, I just want to say that my arguments from the beginning stand. There's no definition of morality, there's no definition of value, and there's no standard by which to measure whether something is good or bad, whether something is of value, whether something is moral. These things are only correctable in Mike's system by other seemings, none of which are derived from observation, none of which are derived from reality. They're just supposed to be properties that we know somehow. Okay, that's going to be the end of my closing. Again, Mike, thank you so much. Where can people find you, Mike?
Thanks. It was great to be here, and thanks for having me. So you can go to my Substack blog, which is called Fake News, Fakenous, on Substack, and everybody should read that. Also, by the way, everybody should buy my books. I have like 12 books on Amazon that you should all buy. Yeah, I also have a website, which is like owl232.net.
What is the owl thing?
Oh, I like to think of the owl as a symbol of wisdom, and because I'm a philosopher, I'm a lover of wisdom.
Awesome. Mike, don't go anywhere. I want to talk to you when we go off air. Audience, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the debate. Obviously, what happens in a debate doesn't ultimately prove conclusions, propositions. It gives you something to think about. I hope you'll look deeper into these issues. I think they're important and I think they're very interesting. For now, this has been the Michael Liebowitz Show. Till next time.